Good.
Going on to the
Okay.
next show.
Yes.
Fast.
Really good or just okay?
Really good.
It's decent. So it's decent. How about yourself?
Decent, yeah.
Anything exciting?
Basketball.
Basketball game.
That's basketball game. No.
Or-
Yes.
The All-Star game you were referring to, right?
Nah, I was trash.
The dunk
That,
contest.
Nah,
bro,
check.
the dunk contest has been making me mad. lately.
Dunk contest, I ain't gonna lie. They
Out of pocket.
They jacked New York, bro. We should
Man.
These windmill in Thames,
I
bro. No
know.
one does that.
Next week we'll be having our exam. Next Friday we'll cover chapters 4, 6, and 7. We skip chapter 5.
It's just gonna be like the last one where it's like.
Yeah, I may throw in something maybe surprising, to keep it a little interesting. But pretty much the same format. But yeah, so that'll be next Friday. So we'll go over the exam next week, but we'll also continue with learning how to learn. I want to start today's class off with the question: free will.
Short ass legs.
Free will. Who believes that they have free will?
At this point, nobody does. The way things are looking.
You don't think you have free will?
Well, the way
What
things are
extent?
looking, the way things are looking.
No, just you. Just you yourself. Let's not say society. Just you as an individual.
Just me myself.
Yes.
Okay, if it's just me myself, I feel like yes, I do have free will. I mean, I have choices I can make on my
To
own.
an extent, Robbie.
To an extent, yes, but there's certain things I have a choice to do that are acceptable. Like there's certain boundaries to a certain free will.
Okay, but you believe that for the most part,
For the most part,
your own
yes.
volition, your own decision, choices,
Yes.
you make.
Because that's just like everybody else. Everybody else has
thoughts.
their own decisions and choices to make. They have the free will to come to class, or they have the free will to choose to come to college here.
Yeah.
Or just things like that. They have free will. I mean,
Okay. So you as an individual, as an individual human person, you're special in the sense that you can make your own decisions and choices specifically tailored for yourself.
for the most part, yes.
For the most part. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
In my opinion, it's like you gotta base it off what category you choose. Like religiously, I believe like we have free religion. Do
Let's just say overall.
overall.
Overall, religion included, but everything else included.
Yeah, I believe you have free will because it's like certain stuff is not what's the word I'm looking for? It's like it's not acceptable in society. But like you can still do it if you want to. Like if you wanted to go out and shoot somebody, you could do it, but you're gonna have consequences for it.
Okay.
So
Will you do it?
No.
For me,
Yeah.
you said, huh?
Would you do it?
Shoot someone?
What
Yeah.
shoot somebody?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
it
would.
depends on the situation. Like if it's you and me, it's gonna be you.
Good answer.
Right.
Good answer. Now you're saying about free will?
I think that like at a certain age you don't really have free will. Like as like a kid you don't have free will. As like a teenager I didn't have free will. I still don't have free will. As like long as I'm living under my parents' roof, I don't have free will. But like I feel like once you're like older and like you're like set off like to your own life or whatever, that's when you actually have free will. But still to an extent, obviously like there's like laws and stuff like that. That's the way I see it.
So to an extent.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a question.
Who here says they have free will? Yes.
I think we all have free will. It's just because, like, overall, everything that we do, every decision that we make is really our choice. Like, even if we have influences, overall, you're the one who's making decisions and actions. So, I mean, it just really depends on what you choose to do. But, like, overall, you have free will to make your own decisions and actions.
I mean, as everybody's saying, like I've said it, he said it, they both have said it. Free, and this goes along with everything else, free will is just based off decisions that you make as well.
So just decisions and choices, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, there's more to it than free will than just decisions that you make and choices, whether people agree with you or not. I mean, there's more to it than that.
Okay. Does it
Yeah, it can. It can be it can involve other people's opinions, whether, yeah, this does involve choices like, but, this is going against what I'm saying, but you could make certain things off of other people's opinion, like whether I should continue playing football or not, and let's say you say no, and them two say yes. It's like a balance out equation of opinions that you can base off of things like that.
Okay.
I
So
feel
that
like-
other factors, right?
Yeah.
The factors influence. Who here says we don't have any free will? What would be the opposite of not having free will? Give me like an example or describe it.
Being
A
held under
prisoner?
certain-
Being in prison, like,
Being in prison, right?
that's like not having free will,
So
like you
could you
have.
still have free will to do certain things even though you're in prison?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, but,
Let's just say you can't get out and do certain things.
Yeah.
but-
deterrence.
In school,
You do have free will in school.
Can we
Dumbo.
predict your quote unquote free will?
No.
Can we predict what you would do
Yes,
No.
based off the choices, decisions?
yes.
And we predict.
So you're saying you can predict on what I'm trying to do then?
I can predict on what I'm like.
No,
gonna do.
that's not what he's
I predicted
no.
it since I was young, like,
That's
I'm
not
not
what he's
gonna go to
asking. though.
college.
He's asking, can you predict what he's gonna do?
No, I can't
That's
predict
what
what
he's
you're gonna do,
asking,
but I can
yeah.
predict,
That's-
predict what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, you can predict what you're gonna do, but he's not asking that though. He's asking, can we predict on what he's gonna do? That's the question, meaning, can you predict what I'm gonna do?
that's what you asking?
Well, I'm asking, can we predict what anyone will do?
Yes,
Yeah,
Yeah.
to a,
exactly what
to a,
I'm
to a
saying,
certain
Robbie.
point.
But how is that correlate to free will?
I don't know how it does.
Meaning that if we just said, hey, go left, go right,
Judgment.
go do something, how can you predict that?
That just involves judgment, really.
Where?
I mean, we can't make
Who believes that we can predict what people will do?
their actions.
I
You think
have.
so? Allison?
This completely up.
Yeah. So we paid
School has
attention
to
to, we paid attention to your previous,
Kinda out of pocket right now. I'm gonna need to stay smooth
right?
right quick.
We could probably predict what you're gonna do next. Determinism is an idea that we are nothing more, right? It's an extreme idea, just as free will may be on one extreme, determinism may be on another. Determinism is the idea that we all are nothing more than our biology, our genetics, and our conditioning. That we can predict. That in essence, we're almost like machines. You're nothing more than your genes with the instructions, with the information to do certain things with your body. And also your genes may influence how you think. It's possible. And that you are your conditioning, your learning. Therefore, we know what you're gonna do. We know your behavior in the future based off your history, where you come from, your family, your genetics, and how you were raised. So what is the answer between the two? I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit of both, right? There's no concrete answer. These are arguments. And these are arguments for you guys to figure out answers for in the future. But something to ponder on. Do we absolutely make independent choices? Like, hey, do I wanna go left or go right? Well, you picking you go left, could we predict that? Based off your genes, your genetics, and based off your conditioned learning. Like, oh, you knew that guy's gonna go left. He comes from that area, he was raised here, right? He has those genetics, that's his history, we already know what he's gonna do. He thought that he picked left because he wanted to. Did you really pick left because you wanted to? Your free will, right? Your independent volition, your thought, your motivation? Or did you pick left because of your history, how you were raised, how you conditioned, how you learned, how those factors influence you, and your genetics? Right?
So scared.
Something to think about, right? Neither is right nor wrong, it may lie somewhere in the middle, but the answer lies in, the theoretical disposition. All right, these are theories. gives us to the topic that we briefly discussed last Wednesday was learning. Right, we're talking about learning. Learning is conditioning. Learning is conditioning. We are conditioned to take certain information and make it useful for our survival, our benefits, our gain, and other things we may discard. But we also can influence. We can influence learning. We can influence the type of information that we may deem to be necessary for survival. Therefore, we can influence how we learn and the information. We can influence how you guys act, how you behave. Which in essence would be, going back to the free will discussion, hey, I've all the free will in the world. But think about it. Everything that you are right now, how you dress, how you talk, how you walk, where you're gonna go left, go right, what you do on an everyday basis could be programmed, right? The program of biology, your genes, and the program of your conditioning, how you were taught and your experiences, how you were taught and your experiences. Something to think about. You two guys in the back, I know you're always contributing. We were talking about free will. We believe in free will determinism. Bring more free will. Hey, I make my own independent choices, my own volition, or determinism. Hey, I may be a product of genetics in conjunction with my history, condition, learning. Yes, sir.
Isn't that just a question of nature versus nurture?
Correct.
So then, why can't it be both?
It could, but what do you subscribe to? Do you subscribe to somewhere in the middle? Do you subscribe to more of free will? You're like, hey, I make more of my own decisions. Those factors of genetics and my conditioning are trivial. They don't even matter. I make my own independent decisions. Whether I go left or go right is my decision. It's not a factor of my biology, my conditioning, my upbringing, my history.
I feel like in order for you to exercise free will, you really have to work at it. You have to be intentional. You have to stop and think why you're doing what you're doing. If you were to just go on autopilot and eat the sandwich or whatever, that's nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if I stop and think, no, I would like to shut my computer screen and stop taking notes, that
Mhm.
is a conscious decision. Because my nature would be to write down the information.
Okay. Which is actually interesting, right? Because you noted that maybe your exercise of free will may require conditioning, meaning you have to work at it, you have to practice, you have to work at it, right? Which is interesting, meaning that they may intersect somewhere, right? There may be an intersection of free will and determinism. I have to work at it. Now, if I don't do this anymore, it escapes my mind, escapes my behavior. I'm no part of it. It's no part of my life anymore. I don't do it. But for some reason, that stimulus comes back around, and I'm going to work on that stimulus, and that's back part of who I am. It's part of my behavior. Think of sports. I'm gonna get to you for a second, but think of sports, right? Conditioning, practice, repeating the same old baseball swing, the same old jump shot, 1,000 times over and over. Try to perfect it, right? You didn't just walk in and just hit a home run. You have to work at it, right? Why? Because there's rules within there. There's also conditioning within the confines and rules of the game or the sport that you're doing. Yes, sir, you were gonna say.
See, I agree with them for the most part, but it also comes down to the person themselves. Just due to the fact that some people stop and think about it, while others just do it without having to think about the consequences of their decision.
So you're saying consciousness, right? Or being conscious.
Yeah.
Being conscious
Some
of
people are
something.
conscious and some people don't care.
Which is also maybe a set of conditioning itself, right? Because you may think about it, like, I'm gonna contemplate, meditate, reflect, whatever the word you use. But you may have to do it over
Yeah.
and over and over. Now, if you get lazy and say, I'm not gonna reflect, meditate, or contemplate, then also that may escape you. And now your behavior's changed again, right? Which brings us to the arguments. These are the arguments, right? The theories, the arguments. which is for you to think and ponder on in reference to yourselves, in reference to others, but also, you know, in reference to larger perspectives. Meaning you can apply this to a job, right? I can condition the students. Can I condition you guys, yes or no?
To a certain extent.
To an extent, right? Hey, Professor Ross added more work. That might be hairdresser change. This sucks, right? Professor Ross surprised us and gave 5 multiple choice questions of some stuff we didn't even cover. Of conditional response, right? You can apply that to an organization. Hey, my boss, my company has changed. The environment's changed, the culture's changed, the policy has changed. Now they are conditioning us to do something else, and they can do it long enough. It's gonna be part of you. It's gonna be part of your discussions every day, your dialogue, conversations to your life. Yes, sir.
But it comes back down to free will because conditioning only works if you let it,
Yeah.
right? If you're trying to condition me that every time I walk into class, you have a certain scent by the door,
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to condition me, but as soon as I catch on, there's no point in trying anymore because it only works if you're clandestine about it.
Yeah. Condition works if you accept it, right? If there's an acceptance and an action of it. Which we could say maybe free will is a supernatural force, right? Can't necessarily scientifically observe it. We could deduce by observation of your behavior, like, hey, you know, you stop accepting it. You switch. But here's the circular argument. But if you stop accepting something, maybe part of determinism, maybe part of your history, your objection for being raised a certain way, your biology. You may be like, hey, you know what? I see something, I objected because of these things, and I also object this thing. So they're interrelated, right? Point is, I don't know if we come to a conclusive synopsis about which one is right, which one's wrong. For the most part, I think they both exist together. But learning, how do you learn? How do you learn? How do you learn? How do we learn? Right? How to learn, why do we learn? So we talked last class about basic learning concepts of classical and operant. Remember those two? This pretty much talks about the whole entire chapter is operant and classical conditioning. Operant, classical conditioning. You can maybe think of operant as an operator, an actor, an individual, placing a stimulus, right, to condition a response, condition person. That may be a way for you to memorize. And classical may go more to reaction to natural stimulus, reaction to nature, right? The nature versus nurture discussion. So classical would be nature. Operant could be nurture. You're nurturing, you're conditioning, you're acting to make people behave in a certain way. We talked about learning process of acquiring information through experience, new and relatively enduring information. Keep in mind that information it can be short-term or long-term, based on the value, based off the benefits that you receive from it. Right? We're going to talk about Pavlov. Pavlov was a Russian physiologist who studied dogs. And he came up with the famous study of observing dogs, saying that dogs salivated when they saw food. Right? We may also salivate if we see something. We may have a natural response. The natural response may be based off survival. Food is a means for survival. Therefore, our program, nature tells us food is needed to survive. Water is needed to survive. Right? Maybe in even some aspects you could say sex is needed to survive the species. There may be the program within you to say, hey, this at some point, also this is needed to survive. Nature's telling you that, right? Maybe an unconscious thing. You're not even choosing it, right? You may have to discipline yourself and condition yourself against certain things. But so yeah, Pavlov studied dogs and he saw that dogs salivated when they saw food. Pavlov worked with dogs and he was studying their digestive systems. But in his laboratory, he had a bell, right? And he noticed the dogs didn't really notice the bell at all. They had no response absolutely to the bell. But he found it interesting that at some point, if he introduced food associative with the bell, the sound of the bell, that the dogs associated the bell with food. Right? The dogs associated that particular sound with food. Therefore, dogs love food. There's a very high stimulus for food. They're motivated for it naturally, right? And he saw that he could make the dogs do certain things if he rewarded them with food alongside using the bell as an instrument. And that kind of led to what we would call like dog training, right? Which is giving a benefit to a dog by adding another stimulus, right? Before, the bell was neutral. It was a neutral stimulus. It had no impact whatsoever on the dogs. Dogs didn't care about the bell. They didn't even notice the bell. The dogs noticed the food naturally, right? So that was a natural stimulus. Conversion 2, you can change your behavior. Conversion 2, you can give a reward, or you can punish, take back, and give a punishment. And this is sort of the basis of our understanding conditional learning, right? And association with classical learning too. Associative learning that certain events occur together. The events may be two stimuli, as in classical conditioning, or a response and its consequence as its operant conditioning, right? The dog was more classical, but let's think of children. If you're raising children, that would be more classical. That would be operant, right? A parent is an operator. A parent is an actor. A parent is someone that's either going to reward or punish a child to get them to learn something, to get them to behave in a way, to get them not to do certain things, to get them to do certain things. So that requires an individual. So for you to easily remember, operant would be something dealing with a parent with a child, right? A parent with a child would be operant. You're conditioning the child at its earliest stages of life. Stimulus is nothing more than an event or situation that evokes a response. What are some natural stimulus besides salivating over food? Yes, sir?
A scent.
A scent, right? You can smell the chemicals in the air, it goes to your nostril blend, and it'll give you a reaction, right? Say you walk in a bathroom and you smell the foul odor, you probably have a reaction, like, wait a couple minutes, go to another bathroom. But it can draw a natural response. Or if you smell something good, you may have the association of food. You smell food, now you're hungry, now you're salivating. These are natural responses. That is a stimulus. Conditioning definition, the process of learning associations, which takes two main forms, classical operant, which we talked about, cognitive learning, acquisition of mental information, whether by observing events, watching others, or through language. And so cognitive learning is sort of the umbrella of it all. We're looking at observation of how people learn, right? We can observe the dog to see how it learns, observe the rat within a laboratory, within a maze, or observe birds and pigeons and things of that nature, to see how they change by us adding different stimulus for them to change. We talked about Pavlov. He's very famous. He's a physiologist, won a Nobel Prize for studying dogs' digestive systems and things of that nature. But he actually has more influence on psychology than anything else, because he pretty much created behavioralism, right? We study how people's behaviors naturally exist and how their behaviors alter based off certain stimulus. Talked about the bell, neutral stimulus. So we go back to that bell. Before we introduce the food, the a neutral stimulus to the dogs. It had no impact. It elicits no response before conditioning, right? So we have the bell, but we haven't introduced the food as stimulus. The bell is a non-factor. It elicits no response. Unconditioned response in classical conditioning and unlearned naturally occurring response, such as salivating, going back to the dog and us may naturally have a certain response to a stimulus, right? It's not based off another person, it's just based off our natural programming, particularly things for survival, such as food. Right? Unconditioned stimulus and classical conditioning stimulus that unconditionally, naturally, or automatically triggers an unconditioned response, right? Which would be some sort of food or smell. And condition would be the opposite, right? Condition response, classical condition and learned response to a previous neutral, the bell, but now conditioned stimulus. Now we've introduced the bell as a reward for food for dog. So therefore now the bell is a condition, can elicit a conditioned response because it's no longer neutral, it's introduced as a stimulus for reaction. And so the point is to get to this is how we learn as human beings, right? We're sort of no different than a dog in how we learn and process information. And so if we look out in society, we could say, well, what are things like conditioned response and stimulus that are out there, right? Marketers use it all the time. Yes, sir.
So then, if we come back to the question of free will versus determinism,
Mhm.
when it comes to those dogs,
Mm-hmm.
do they have the capability to fight their nature? Do they resist being conditioned?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't particularly have an answer, right? We would have to observe the dogs to see like what other environments we could set them in to observe that, to see if that's possible. What other stimulus we can add. But it's a very good question. It's a very good question on if the dogs have some sort of free will to reject. Because then you would say, well, maybe the dog just has a natural response. Right? Fight or flight may be a natural response. But if the dog observes something, assesses it, and cognitively makes the decision, it's interesting. I mean, it might show a form of intelligence. You know, things like pigs do that, right? You know, pigs do that. Rats may do that in some scenario where we've made an observation from. I think dogs possibly could do it. It just really would depend on the environment and the stimulus factors in there. But the answer is I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, right? So, but at least they're very good idea to ponder on, right? Because we said maybe free will may be a supernatural force that may not be well understood under scientific experimentation, right? So if we're saying supernatural, we may be talking about the identity of a soul, right? You might say, well, the dog has a soul, we have a soul. And the soul has information, and it has its own information that leads to actions and behaviors that we can't fully understand. That could be a very good argument, but I don't know how we could make that to a scientific argument, right? So basically, it's more of a philosophical argument, right? Determinism, free will, old philosophical debate. But, you know, a lot of psychology derives from philosophy, mostly a lot of the fields in social sciences, behavioral sciences derive from philosophy, right? Right? The love of wisdom, study of knowledge and learning and ideas and things of that nature. A lot of psychologists do subscribe to one or the other, and a lot of them think that we are nothing more than just programs or robots. You know, mom and dad taught us this, the schools taught us this, our environments taught us this, we have these genetics. We can make absolute predictive factors that you will become this type of person and make these sorts of actions and behaviors in your life. Which could be partially true, because we actually make a lot of predictions about people. can look at your behavior online to make pretty accurate predictions about what you'll do next, you know, who you are, what you like. Acquisition is the initial stage when one links a neutral stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus so that the neutral stimulus begins triggering the conditioned response, right? Neutral stimulus, the bell, which was neutral at one point, and then unconditioned, the salivation, right, from the dog, so that the neutral stimulus becomes triggering the conditioned response. The bell will now begin to trigger a response from the dog. The dog knows that there's a reward. The dog knows that there's food associated with the bell. Therefore, when the dog hears the bell now, his first thought is food. His first thought is food. Before, his first thought was nothing. So if you apply that to children, we can also say that we can introduce something to a child that had absolutely no impact on them before. We can introduce now what they benefit, and now it's become a very important factor. Now we can make them change their behavior based on that. You know, you can take a simple things like cleaning up their room, right? Clean up your room, you have a slice of pie. Now cleaning up the room has become a routine because there's a reward to it. You do it long enough, that you may be a tidy person as you become an adult. Why? Because mom reinforced cleaning up my room with a reward when I was a child. Right? This may lead to our behavior as adults. Hey, why are you so neat and tidy? You may probably forgot, right, the things that mom and dad did for you and their conditioning of you. And so like, I don't know why I'm like that, but I really like, I'm real tidy, I'm real neat. There's a history to that, right? There's a history to that. So we can do those types of things, even with adults, we do them all. Like we said, the job, the school examples. Buy one, get one free. Buy one, get one free. What's that all about? About getting to buy one, right? You get one free as a reward, right? You're inducing people to say, wow, there's a reward. I get a free one? Really free? Oh, that's awesome. Everybody loves free. What's the best tasting food? Free food. You know? So yeah, it's used all across. So the point is, if you can understand this, you also can influence people's behavior by conditioning them. Politicians do it all the time, marketers do it all the time, corporations, sports, right? You can condition a response based off of reward for benefit. Hey, do 10 extra laps. 10 extra laps if you don't hit 5 free throws in a row. Now what does the person want to do? The person doesn't want to be punished by doing 10 extra laps. They're going to practice more so they can hit 5 free throws in a row. Now they're excellent free throw shooters. Right? We've taught. They've learned, but we've taught. And teaching is conditioning. Extinction, diminish of a conditioned response, which is in essence, if we're not constantly reinforcing these stimulus to you, right? Not constantly saying buy one, get one free. You're not showing back up. But somebody else got a better deal that has a reward, a benefit. Right? So you have to constantly have these sales. You have to constantly give reward. Else we lose it. Right? We lose it. So it doesn't stay forever. Some things may stay long term, other things may not. It's based off the frequency of what we introduce to. So just think of Concordia, right? The amount of classes you have, the amount of workload you have, and the rewarding factors that you receive from it. You know, whether you're an excellent student or a poor student, probably based off the amount of work that you do and the rewards and benefits that you perceive that you get from it. Others may feel they don't receive that much reward or benefit, therefore we become very lax and we don't care. right? Eventually, maybe we stop going to school, we fell out. But we need conditioning, we need some benefits, we need rewards. We need rewards in order to keep the behavior going, in order to keep learning new things. Spontaneous recovering, reappearance, right? Now we got a stimulus, the stimulus went away, 2 years later it's back, right? 2 years later it's back. We can have a very quick spontaneous recovery, if I would remember how to learn those things, right? It's kind of like muscle memory. You stop playing basketball for a while, say I haven't hooped in like 3 years or something. You get back on the court, takes a game or two, now you're back at it. Like, now this is good as it was before, you still got it, right? Still got it. This is a graph for extinction and acquisition and spontaneous recovery. It's just alluding to the strength of acquisition over time frame. It doesn't really give too much information. Generalization, tendency once the response has been conditioned for stimuli similar to the conditioning stimulus to elicit similar response, right? Similar conditioned stimulus to elicit similar responses. We begin to associate things with other things, and therefore we have a generalization in our responses to similar items. A discrimination, learning ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimulus, which predicts the unconditioned stimulus, and other irrelevant stimuli. Talk about Pavlov with the dogs. Consensus among psychologists is that classical conditioning is a basic form of learning. So always keep Pavlov in your mind, especially if you're going to education or learning or developing curriculum. In essence, he is the groundwork or the foundation for how we learn. Pavlov's principles are used to influence human health and well-being, areas of consciousness, motivation, emotion, health, psychological disorders, and therapy. Which is kind of, I talked about before, but therapy, how we can figure out our disorders and our issues, right? You guys came to me and be like, hey, I have an issue with substance, right? I have a substance abuse problem. We will have to work on where that come from by looking at the response and benefits or punishments at some point in your lifetime that made that part of who you are and why you like that thing so much, right? Why do you have a constant response to this particular stimulus, right? What are the benefits for it, and what are the detriments for it, and how you weigh one or the other in order to get you to stop. Which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just kind of asking a question over and over and over again and get to the genesis of why, where exactly that comes from, right? But understand where that comes from, because you may not understand where it comes from. So we keep asking associative questions to figure out the genesis of those things. Here it talks about addicts are counseled to avoid stimuli, for example, people and settings. So stimulus are not all just things, right? Stimulus for who you are, your conditioning may be your group of people that you hang with. Stimulus may be the settings that you place yourself in constantly, right? Let's say our stimulus may be our phones, our laptops, right? Those elicit certain behaviors in response, which are either great for you or very harmful for you, right? Depending on the amount of time that you're on it. Which we build addictions too. Keep that in mind too. You know, if we all have the technology, right? iPhone, all those different things. But we may not associate these things with abuse, right? We may not associate with abuse. But then I ask you, how many hours in a day do you actually use these devices? You be like, man, I'm on this thing like everywhere. I gotta use it when I carry it when I go to the bathroom. I look at it when I lay down before I go to sleep. I'm checking this, I'm checking that. Are Are you an addict? Are you an abuser of technology? Because then I say, well, what's the benefit? What is the benefit? Hey, tell me. You say, hey, Professor Ross, I made $1 billion because I'm on the internet 14 hours a day. Could that be true? Probably not. Right? Well, what's the benefit? You know, if you really think about what are the benefits of it? You actually know that Professor Ross makes me feel worse. Why? I don't know, I like on people's Instagram, they're taking the greatest trips in human history, they have the greatest cars, the most perfect person they're in love with, they're famous, they're celebrity, they get power, and I don't have any of that. Like, oh, okay, so why do you keep going on there? Wait, that's a good question. why do you keep going on there, right? But, well, okay, but there's also some good benefits. It motivates me, right? I want to, motivate. I saw the guy or girl do that. Now I want to do that. I saw them dress like this. Now I want to dress like that. Right? I want to be that. So you weigh the pros and cons, but it is a stimulus, and that stimulus may have a significant impact on our conditioning, who we are becoming, right? I subscribe to this belief. Why? Because my behavior every day is I go and I directly look for this particular information, Professor Ross. Very rarely. You're not just looking for any information. No, I want this information to reinforce those beliefs. Pairing a particular taste with a drug that influences immune response may eventually lead to immune response from the taste alone. Which is dealing more with abuse, right? Pairing a particular taste. Let's think of food. Right? Obesity is a huge problem in this country, but probably around the world. And you pair a particular taste, you do the studies, you be like, oh, these many people love this particular taste, and now we can create abuse and addiction based on that. Why? Because people have a propensity to abuse anything that makes them feel good. And food is something that makes us feel good. People can abuse sex because it makes us feel good. Like, I want this much of it, right? People can abuse any sort of psychedelic drug because it makes them feel good. There's a threshold, right? The people supplying it know this, so they're actually conditioning you. Coca-Cola could be conditioning you for diabetes, right? Could be conditioning you to be later on in life to be put on dialysis and have your blood filtered. Candy bars, all these different things. Candy bar near the register when you go. Candy and gum and pop. Quick stimulus. Like, wow, they put it here, quick stimulus. I gotta make a quick decision. I gotta hurry and check out. It doesn't give you time to reflect. Like, I don't think that's pretty unhealthy. These things are done on purpose. Applications of classical conditioning. Pavlov's work provided a basis for Watson, who was the famous behaviorist, ideas that human emotions and behaviors, though biologically influenced, are mainly a bundle of conditioned response. Which goes back to the argument, are we primarily conditioned as individuals to make us who we are today? Or are we just some conspicuous individuals that make our own decisions and we are who we are because we said so? Right? Most of the old psychologists don't believe that. We believe that we're programmed. You guys believe that we are all programmed to believe so. Watson boasts that he can take any healthy infant and train the child for any career specialization, regardless of inborn traits, but later admitted to going beyond his past. He basically stated, before you go, he basically stated that he could take any baby and make that baby a lawyer, a doctor, a murderer, a thief, whatever he wanted to, if he was allowed to condition. That's something to ponder. Could you take any baby out there and make them to a psychopath, a thief, a murderer, a doctor, a president, a lawyer? Could that be good? So reflect on that before we, get to our next class. And we'll come back to that next time.